I will pass this on now to Paula, who has the awesome folks from the Alliance for Innovative Regulation. I see Joanne is here, so Paula, I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Simeon. In a remarkable feat, we're running 5 minutes ahead of schedule. I do see that Joanne is with us, and I see that David has just joined as well. So I'll welcome them to turn on their videos and audio, and we will commence.
Paula, I've been having some problems with my audio. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear it.
Likewise. Thank you, Joanne and David, for joining us here today. Our two speakers today come as co-founders of the Alliance for Innovative Regulation, and they can share a lot of insights on what's happening on the regulatory side. This is a Q&A session. I have a number of questions for Joanne and David, but I would also encourage the audience to chime in on the chat, and we'll add your questions to the mix as well. But I think first of all, I'd like to do is ask Joanne and David to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about AIR.
Great. Thank you so much for having us. We are really excited to be with you today. So I'm Joanne Barefoot. I'm CEO and co-founder of AIR with David. We founded AIR last year, not last year, 2019 actually. And our mission is to help the financial regulatory system digitize and modernize in order to drive financial inclusion and fair financial practices. I'm a former bank regulator myself. I was deputy controller of the currency in the United States. And we think that what you're doing at Mojaloop is the perfect thing at the perfect time, because the financial sector is digitizing rapidly. All kinds of new technology is coming into it, but we won't be able to optimize the potential benefits nor counter the potential downside risks of some of this new technology unless we can keep the regulatory system up to date with it. So we work on that particular spot to try to bring new techniques, new technology to the regulators and help the regulators connect up with innovators like those of you at Mojaloop. And David, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, my name is David Eric, and it's my great pleasure to join Joanne on this journey for the promotion of regulation innovation. I have 20 years experience in payments and financial institutions. I was a general manager in the prepaid group at American Express and the head of credit card strategy at JP Morgan Chase. I'm also the architect of the National Bank account standards, the National Bank on Account Standards, which were developed to help banks in the US develop bank accounts that don't have overdraft fees. I'm a co-founder of Petal, which is a fintech credit card that uses cash flow underwriting to help identify creditworthy people who don't have a history of credit, and now working with Joanne on the question of regulation innovation. But thank you very much. It's great to be here, and we really look forward to exploring some of these issues with you.
Excellent. Thanks for that intro. So you've noted that there's a need for change to financial regulation systems. What are the limitations of the current systems in place today?
Yeah, I will start. So the system we have today was created in the analog age, right? So everything that's done by bank regulators was designed on paper originally, decades ago, even centuries ago. And through the years, we've automated a lot of it, but the basic design is still analog era. As we come into the digital era, we can do better than that. We can make things better, cheaper, and faster. And the main limitations are that regulators today are using information that, first of all, is limited. They're using samples of information to try to understand what a big pool of data might be telling them. They're using lagging information. They rely on reports that often come in quarterly or even annually on our About Ancient History. The COVID crisis has really accelerated the concern about regulators not being able to see in real time what's going on. And then regulators get information in a form that's very difficult to work with. It's very hard with non-digital information to be able to bring to it techniques like machine learning or natural language processing that can really help them understand the flows of risk, emerging risks, vertical and horizontal cuts at what may be happening as trends in the system. And these limitations are becoming intensified by the acceleration of technology. Technology is accelerating at an exponential rate. The COVID pandemic has given everyone a hard lesson in what exponential curves look like. They look pretty gradual for a long time, and then suddenly, as the change doubles and redoubles over and over, they spike vertically in a hockey stick pattern. And we worry that regulators will find themselves under that curve as it turns upward and won't be able to catch up. And so in that delta between their traditional analog processes and what's actually happening in the marketplace, there's going to be a risk rising. And so we're trying to help them digitize and speed up, get better information in real time.
You know, regulators around the world have been struggling with the use of technology, and we've seen it here in the US in the COVID crisis in real time, right? You know, the challenges that small business had in terms of accessing the payroll protection program, the challenges that workers who had been laid off had in terms of accessing unemployment. You know, we've seen in real time that our government is using 20th century technology and facing 21st century crises. And that is a challenge that our regulators face around the world in some cases.
So what countries have shown the most innovation in the regulatory space? What projects are worth emulating?
Well,
yeah.
The FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, has been a real leader in this concept of regulatory innovation. They have been pioneering this for the last 5 years. In fact, we have a case study that is going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks that will outline really the advantages that they have identified through different techniques like tech sprints and sandboxes and accelerators. One of the projects that they have been working on in particular that I think has been really interesting is digital regulatory reporting, where you know, they've asked this question: what would digital reporting look like if regulators actually issued requirements in code? Right? You could actually issue a regulation reporting requirement in code, and then the covered institutions could take that code and integrate it into their process and actually report against it. They ran a tech sprint on this a couple of years ago. Joanne was actually there and saw it. And it was just remarkable in terms of their ability not only to access data in real time and accurately, but they were also able to change the algorithm. Right? So they were able to actually prove it come through once and then change it and actually see the changes made in real time, which is a remarkable development for regulatory reporting that has implications in terms of increasing the effectiveness, our ability to regulate in real time, which has been extremely important, especially through financial crises, but also to radically decrease the cost of reporting from the point of view of covered institutions. Joanne, you were actually there. Do you want to describe what it was like when that happened?
I actually was not at that one. I was at a different one, but that there is video online that you can see of the, it was a 2-week tech sprint, 2-week hackathon, very high risk actually, might not have worked. And when it did work, everyone in the room jumped up and cheered. And I like to say, when was the last time we saw regulators and financial companies cheering together? You know, we don't see it that often, but it's a real breakthrough. And Paula, to your question on where the innovation is happening, another particular powerhouse of innovation has been Singapore. And they have taken this concept now into their accelerator that they are running. I was a judge this year in a G20 tech sprint, which had 3 use cases gathered from regulators around the world. One of them was on regulatory reporting, and there's a formidable project underway to try to completely transform regulatory reporting with techniques like this. So it's exciting. We don't want to overstate it. This isn't going to be in your regulators' toolkit next year, probably, but the world is adopting these new kinds of techniques. Regulators everywhere. We're at an early stage of it still, but we should be optimistic about it. It's going in the right direction.
And I think we see a huge opportunity for regulators in emerging markets, where in some cases they are not hampered with the same kind of legacy systems that we have in some of the more mature markets. And so what we're hoping to see is opportunities where emerging markets are able to leapfrog the technology constraints that some of the more mature markets have. And so that is something that we'll be working for over the next couple of years.
Thank you. Well, and as you know, a center of gravity for us certainly has been Africa, and we're really interested in kind of unlocking this conversation about regulation as code. How do you think we can use tech sprints, accelerators, hackathons to help move this forward?
Yeah, we think that this is the way to do it. I think everyone knows what a regulatory sandbox is at this point, and these tech sprints are regulatory hackathons. The UK invented the model that most people are using. And the thing that they accomplish is they give the regulator an easy and fairly easy and safe way to start down the innovation journey. Because if you're sitting in the shoes of a regulator, which again I have done, and you look at people telling you you should change your whole system, it's so complicated. It's grounded in laws, even within a country, not to mention taking it to an international arena. But these techniques of sandboxes and tech sprints enable the regulator to do something that at AIR we like to call thinking big but starting small. Start with something concrete. Try to solve a problem that people care about. We held a tech sprint last fall on countering the use of cryptocurrency to purchase online child sexual abuse material, which is an issue that everyone cares about. And the format brings people together who are not usually together, especially the tech sprint. So you have in our case, we had the crypto companies, we had banks, we had law enforcement people, we had bank regulators, we had child advocates, we had the actor Ashton Kutcher participating because he founded a child advocacy organization that's concerned about this. We had members of Congress, and you bring that broad group of people to the table who usually are never going to interact, and you find out that if you put the experts together with the tech people don't understand the problem because it's not something they work with all the time. And the people who understand the problem don't understand the potential tech solutions. When you put them side by side and start creating actual tools, David and I actually just got off of an FCA conference a few minutes ago where they invited us and the US agency FinCEN to come in and talk about this tech sprint because it changed FinCEN's ability to do things by finding new tools that they didn't have. So this is a really powerful method, especially to sort of jumpstart the regulatory innovation process among regulators.
And part of the challenge is that much of the technology innovation is taking place in the private sector. But the traditional regulatory relationship with covered institutions keeps the covered institutions at arm's length. And so it makes it even harder for the regulators to learn about the technology innovations that are taking place in the private sector. So there's kind of a natural lag time. And by having tech sprints, you create a single problem that encourages people to come together and collaborate and jointly problem solve. It's a way to actually transfer innovation information about new technologies from the private sector to the regulators in an environment that doesn't, have any implications around, informing regulatory action or informing enforcement. So we found these tools to be extremely powerful to really help create a new model of collaboration and to help regulators, which are designed to maintain the status quo. They're designed to decrease risk, right? Innovation by definition is informed by risk, right? And so we need new models of collaboration and new models of innovation for regulators in order for them to embrace new technologies and learn about them. Learn about them not only from the point of view of what they need to regulate, but also from the point of view of what they can actually internalize and bring in-house and actually use new technologies to do a better job of regulation.
Great. So you've sold me on tech sprints, but the question as a sidebar, have you been hosting many virtually since we've all been locked down and steering clear of airports?
Yes, we have, and it's amazing how well it works. You lose something, obviously, but you also gain something, including making it easier for people to participate. And making it easier to cross borders. Paula, you know that we are planning a tech sprint with the Financial Conduct Authority, which is going to include several emerging market regulators, assuming we can get it put together. And it is focused on empowering women economically in the COVID pandemic. Women have been especially hard hit by the pandemic in many, many ways. And there's a role for financial regulators in helping them with resilience. And so we're going to do one that we're hosting at AIR in the United States. There's going to be one in London. And then we're looking for host countries in Africa and Asia. And we hope to make it sort of a follow the sun tech sprint in which people will be working on this problem around the clock. We couldn't do that if we had to do it. We couldn't do it as easily if we had to use physical locations. So it works really well. We held one tech sprint at the height of the pandemic over a weekend. We started at 7 p.m. in the evening in Eastern time and finished on Sunday night. And we had people from all over the United States and all over the world. Some of them were up all night working on it virtually, and it worked incredibly well.
That's great to hear. Got a quick question from the audience. They were curious if you have any thoughts on the brand new RAS platform just launched by Pakistan. Are you familiar with it?
Not deeply enough to comment on it. I've heard about it. We're very interested, but I would love to hear what you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm probably in the same boat as you. So we'll have the individuals. She's going to share a link with us, but we'll do some follow up on that.
Right.
Paula, it is interesting. We're starting to see this percolate throughout the market. You have different countries that are beginning to stand up their own platforms, and you also have some reg tech firms that are independently standing up platforms which can be used by central banks or regulators in markets around the world. So this is definitely we're at the very front end of a tidal wave, but this is a wave that is definitely coming, and you see all of the indications of that.
Great. Are you aware of any cross-border regulatory movements that show how the regulators might collaborate via digital public good or regulation as code thinking?
There's a lot of energy internationally in this. I'm not aware of any very strong bilateral agreements. I mean, there's plenty of that, countries working with each other in various ways, but there is real energy in a lot of the global and international bodies. So one example is that the UK again founded GFIN, the Global Financial Innovation Network. It has many countries in it now, and it's a way for regulators and central banks to come together and choose problems they want to work on in a cross-border way and innovate together, come up with models that other people can use. The G20 held a tech sprint this year. Maybe I already mentioned it. I was a judge in it. And looked at a lot of globally focused kinds of solutions. The Bank for International Settlements has a very robust innovation group going on with several hubs that are running experiments and also really smart, sophisticated thinking about regulatory innovation. The Gates Foundation, which is a friend of yours and a friend of ours, has a lot of projects that are going on like this. I'm forgetting some of them, but the UN has a lot of interesting activity going on, the World Bank, CGAP, this issue is high on the agenda of these bodies, and they're many of them are working on building cross-border capability. One of the keys, the sort of end goal of what we want to see happen over the next decade or so is going to be regulatory interoperability, the ability to get information into standardized data formats so that if you want to look at data, if you're a regulator and you want to understand what's going on, say in a Mojaloop project that's crossing borders in Africa, it'll be easy to standardize it, and that in turn will make it easier for projects to cross borders, especially payments. Payments tends to be at the forefront of these kinds of changes since they're inherently about moving money around.
I think what we see is that one of the most powerful mechanisms for engaging cross-border collaboration is by having a project. And one of the observations that we made is that projects that have the most opportunity for success and gain the greatest traction is where there's a win-win between regulators and covered entities. And one place where you see a huge amount of interest in this is around anti-money laundering. Just because the costs are so high and the impact of failure is so great. Everybody recognizes the need for and the opportunities for improvement in that ecosystem.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's another example. Actually, FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, working on those issues, is doing a lot of global work that drives in the directions we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. So without painting a target on a particular regulator's back, are there any signals about what makes an early adopter identifiable? Like, who should we be really targeting for conversations about Mojaloop?
So this is such a great question. There's some things that are clear signs. So most regulators travel a pretty predictable path on this. They start having their top executive talk about this in speeches. They may hold a conference or a roundtable and kind of put their foot in the water. And then they tend to graduate to sandboxes and tech sprints. There are sandboxes now all over the world. Some are great, some are not as productive maybe, but it's all part of the journey of the regulators learning. So if you're seeing those signs, it's a key thing. I also think that one of the keys to this that's maybe less obvious is when the regulator is empowering younger people in key jobs. The fact is, I'm a baby boomer. The fact is that the millennial generation and younger are digitally native. And frankly, they just get it all better than the baby boomers do. They get it more intuitively. And so we are always encouraging young people being empowered in these agencies to drive or at least help shape a lot of these efforts. And so if your regulator that you want to talk to does have an innovation program, go there. But if they don't, talking with the people who are charged with financial inclusion, which Mojaloop is such a force for, or consumer protection, and maybe finding the young ones who understand technology is a good starting point.
I think I would add the regulators that are open to listening to the market. What we've seen as a path forward here is that one of the early steps that regulators take are to create innovation offices and hold office hours where fintechs and regtechs can come in and talk about what they're doing and the new technologies that they're pioneering. It becomes a very successful way for the regulatory agencies to learn about what's happening in the private market in terms of new technologies and the implementation of new technologies. And so this has been, I think, a strong indicator of whether or not regulators are open to regulatory innovation is really, are they searching it out? Are they listening for new innovation that's taking place in the market?
And could I add that one of our messages on this is not to be afraid of them, not to say that there's no risk in talking with regulators. There could be some, but usually the misperception is that the innovators in the marketplace are way overestimating the chance that if they talk to their regulator, something will go wrong. And we've had a whole generation of fintech innovators worldwide who've sort of tried to fly under the radar and hope the regulators don't notice them. We could name names, but we probably don't need to. And that, sometimes works. It eventually catches up to you. But a smarter thing to do is just to go and talk to them. They need the education, for one thing. One of my favorite stories is from Christopher Woolard, who had been he was the acting head of the Financial Conduct Authority for a while last year, and he's been involved in the FCA's fintech innovation from the beginning. And we have a podcast show, which we commend to you all, called Barefoot Innovation, which talks about these issues. I had him as a guest on the show. And he said the reason they formed their original innovation group was that they had a company come in and talk to them about whether what it was planning to do, the innovation that it was planning, would cause regulatory problems. And I don't remember the details anymore, but the gist of it was that they had spent months with a law firm and had spent a tremendous amount of money getting legal advice to work up their courage to approach the regulator with this idea. And Chris said that they listened to it and immediately said, you don't even need regulatory permission to do that. It's fine. And he said it just was such an eye-opening moment for them as regulators to realize that these people have been too intimidated to just ask the question. And that was why they created office hours and really created the template that people all over the world are now using of just opening the door for better dialogue. Don't be afraid of them. They don't bite.
And I would add that for market innovators, meeting with regulators is also a great opportunity, not just to present what you're working on and help educate the regulators, but also to listen to the regulators about what and how they regulate. What is important to them, right? Sometimes startups will go and speak to the regulators and they'll pitch their new process and then ask the regulators, well, what do you think? Are you going to give us a gold star? We're good to go. And, regulators won't do that. That's not their job, right? But it's actually very helpful to ask a regulator, what is your job? So what do you think of this? What are the regulatory implications of this idea? What are the areas that I should be concerned about? Where should I be smart? Where should I, be paying close attention? And that impresses regulators because it gives them an opportunity to also influence the direction that your innovation is taking.
Right. So shifting focus here for a moment, I want to talk a little bit more about the open source model that we have, of course, have embraced. What should we do to help regulators become proponents of open source as a way of removing fragmentation in the marketplace, but also to increase fraud and anti-money laundering controls compliance?
David, you want to talk about our approach on
Sure.
that?
One of our most recent projects was a tech sprint that we ran on the traceability of cryptocurrency and its ability to identify and apprehend perpetrators of child sexual abuse materials. And we ran this tech sprint in conjunction with a number of different regulators, and we were able to present to the director of FinCEN and his senior leadership team. The solutions were really excellent, and the enforcement folks at FinCEN are very excited about them. Have already, identified a new data set that they have not been aware of and have integrated that into their process already, which is very exciting. But what we're doing is taking these three solutions, which happen to be complementary, and in an open source environment, we are standing up a solution for FinCEN, which we will partner with FinCEN to make sure that it meets their needs, and also it will make the solution integratable with their legacy systems. But at the same time, we'll have an open source solution that can be leveraged and appropriated by any jurisdiction, any regulator in any jurisdiction around the world. So it is really a technology whose time has come. There's no question about it. There is a certain hesitancy on the side of regulators. They're still learning what open source means. When they hear the term open source, they often think, if it's open, it's not secure. And so helping regulators come up that learning curve is really necessary. That's at one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, you have regulators like the CFPB, which have been created on an open source platform from its very beginning. So you do see a broad range of kind of regulatory approaches towards open source, and it's an area where we feel very passionately, and we're very excited about the work that you're doing at Mojaloop, because this is another one of those conversations whose time has come. We're a little bit ahead of the tidal wave here, but when regulators develop a level of comfort with open source, and when they understand how valuable it will be to actually lower costs and transmit technology tools across jurisdictions in a very cost-effective way, we think this is the future of regulatory technology.
And it starts with the basic education. As David said, regulators, there's been very little use of open source so far in the regulatory world. As David referenced, we have stood up a GitHub repository for open source code that deals with financial regulation, working with the Linux Foundation and the FinTech Open Source Foundation, Finos. And it's just brand new, and as far as most regulators thinking about it. I think the first thing you got to do is help them understand what it is and what it isn't, because as David said, when a regulator hears open source, they picture something that's insecure. And so helping them understand why, what the benefit is, what is appropriate for open source use, and how to craft solutions, and the ability to build on each other's solutions. Same reason the technology world open sourced its code, the regulators should do too, so that people can build on each other's work and not reinvent the wheel every time, and so that people can find the problems. We can crowdsource the efforts to find the weaknesses in what's been built and make sure that it's robust. We held two actually webinars for regulators on open source and just taught them the basics of it, because most of them really honestly were quite unfamiliar with what it even is.
Yeah, and as a side note, we had Gab from the Finos organization on our last session in October, provided some interesting insights. But can you tell us a little bit more about the RegTech SIG that you are involved in at Finos?
Yeah,
Sure, and that you're involved in as well.
Yeah, I'm going to give you guys the stage, though.
It's actually how we met. It was so exciting. The SIG is a special interest group of Finos, of the FinTech Open Source Foundation. And it's a special interest group that's dedicated to RegTech and to the development of using open source in RegTech and to help build and transmit platforms, technology platforms in ways that can be shared. And, Joanne earlier talked about the importance and the need for interoperability. We see open source as a mechanism for helping drive the market towards interoperability, because in order for open source to work, very often you're actually establishing a common data language for the elements that would be used on a particular technology tool. So we're actually finding that that's an incredible focus of the conversations we're having in the SIG, which have been really exciting and really interesting. We are working right now. The SIG is brand new. We've had tremendous response, and we have about 10 projects that have been proposed to be incorporated into the SIG. We'll probably prioritize and choose about 2 or 3 of those projects, and then encourage the participants to work on them. And we will manage them in an open source, fashion on the GitHub repository. It's been a very exciting development, and like your relationship with Finos, we've really enjoyed getting to know them and the tremendous assets that they've created to help move forward the objective of open source in the greater RegTech world. It's very exciting.
And David is co-chairing the SIG along with Ian Hollowbread of ING Bank.
Right. Well, great. Yeah, we've been glad to work with Gab on a number of initiatives and hope to continue to do so. Certainly, they have the mothership of the Linux Foundation, which has been a strong advocate for open source, of course. So you've got me convinced. I'm absolutely determined that we have a tech sprint in this space, and I'd love to hear from other folks on the call here today. But how do we go about it? How do we tackle this? What would be your recommendations?
So the first stage is just ideation. What are the pain points? As David said, can you see some potential areas where there's a shared pain point between the regulators and the industry? Can you see areas where everyone actually cares about doing better? Again, anti-money laundering efforts have been the subject of a lot of tech sprints because there's so much consensus that what we do now isn't working and that it matters. But begin to find, pull together a group of people who are thoughtful about this and that are crossing the silos, not just the people that are always in the same conversation, and begin to articulate a proposed problem statement, and then hold roundtables and or a conference to begin to get people talking about how should you frame that problem statement. We should say we have published a manual on how regulators can conduct tech sprints, which is available on our website at regulationinnovation.org, which we're sharing with everyone. But once you've started to get the problem statement figured out, then you recruit people you have to recruit the right group of kinds of entities, public and private entities together, subject matter experts and lawyers and, the whole spectrum. And then you have to also get the right mix of people in the sprint itself, including the right tech people. You need front-end designers and back-end designers and software engineers, as well as, like I say, regulatory lawyers and product developers and so on. And then just start small. Don't be overly ambitious. It's kind of hard to do a first one. You could do it for, a day or two at the beginning. So the really ambitious ones have run for a couple of weeks or sometimes been spaced out over several months. But get those people together. You can't believe the magic in it. We have realized that of all the things we do, and I've had a long career working with these kinds of issues. I was a senior fellow at Harvard. I've, written in depth on these topics. We've been involved in many ways. Nothing compares to a tech sprint for creating energy and passion for solving these problems. The people come together, they're put together with people, not only people they don't know, but people that they don't know anything about. They're not familiar with the skill set of the person on the other side of that equation. And when the tech people start putting their heads to the government problem, people have this idea that government problems are boring. They're not, they matter. And when that comes alive for tech people and they start saying, well, why don't we try this? Or why don't we look at this database? And people come out of it so energized to work together and solve the problems. That's why AIR is creating this accelerator that David mentioned to sort of close the gap between the energy that comes out of a tech sprint and actually having an implementable solution that a regulator can pick up that tool and use it. But it is really worth doing, and it's all about the chemistry of the people involved. I don't know of any exceptions. I won't name names, but we've had agencies. Everyone has the same experience with it. If you're doing this, you're going to be surrounded by people who are skeptical, and at the end of it, they're not skeptical. They go, wow, I never imagined that this could be so great. So we want to work with you and Mojaloop on a tech sprint, and we would love to talk about what the, what the right problem statements would be, and let's just start down the journey.
I've dropped into the chat a link to our website where we have a manual on how to produce a tech sprint. And like Joanne said, we're available for technical assistance and would love to partner with you on producing a tech sprint. Another very important resource, which the link is in our website as well, is to a paper that the FCA wrote on the importance of tech sprints as an innovation tool. It's less tactical and more strategic about how tech sprints are a useful tool for innovation. But I think those papers were designed to work in conjunction with one another, where one is kind of more at a strategic level and one is at more of a tactical level. But together, I think they can help you really understand the opportunity that a tech sprint provides and how to get there.
Excellent. We'll definitely dig into that and have further fodder for discussions to follow. I also did want to note that Rob Reeve has pointed out that he's involved in the FCA Tech Sprint. He's presenting tomorrow, so we'll hear a little bit more about that tomorrow. Thanks, Rob. So I think we have a couple minutes left. Any wrap-up thoughts, words of encouragement for the Mojaloop community?
I will say that you're trying to work on the hardest things. Financial inclusion has been an elusive goal forever, and you're making real strides on that. But when you have to bring the regulators to the table. That's crucial to really make this work well. And think about regulators. And I'm, again, a former regulator. I think the regulators have the hardest job. I have no criticisms of them, but this is hard for them. They're not at the cutting edge of technology. They have conservative cultures that are, that's a feature, not a bug. They're designed to be prudent and careful. So it's very hard for them to do rapid innovation. It doesn't come naturally for them to collaborate with the private sector. It doesn't come naturally for them to work cross-border, and they have hardly heard of open source. So you're trying to do all the things that are hardest for them. And having said that, I am incredibly optimistic. I think you're going to see change coming faster than you think if you really bring them in and help them understand the good that can be done of what you're doing. It's a wind sweeping all over the world that regulators are they want to learn, they want to innovate, they want to move faster, so you're at the right place at the right time with a really important effort, and I'm very, very optimistic about it.
And Paula, I would just end with a couple calls to action. For those of you who would like to learn more about AIR, our website is www.regulationinnovation.org. And Joanne mentioned her podcast, which is a podcast on innovation. She has fascinating guests from all parts of the regulation innovation ecosystem. Look for our white paper, where we're doing a case study on financial regulation innovation by looking at the process that the Financial Conduct Authority has gone through over the last 5 years. And lastly, join Paula and I in the FINO SIG. It is open to the public, and we would love to have you join and learn about what we're doing and participate in the projects that we're going to be standing up over the next year.
Great. Well, David, Joanne, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to ongoing dialogues with you and perhaps a tech sprint in our future. So I'm going to thank you again, and turn it back over to Simeon to wrap up for the day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paula.
Thanks so much, Joanne, David, and Paula. Very exciting session, and lots of really useful resources to dig into. I'm pretty sure there are a number of people in our community who would be keen on tech sprint. Excellent. This brings us to the end of day one with 9 and a half minutes to spare. In my history as a in my Mojo Loop history as the person coordinating the programs, I think this is a feather in my cap. But I do want to say a big thank you to all the speakers for keeping time and for such really wonderful sessions and presentations today. This was day one of the business session. Tomorrow we do continue with business sessions as well. Please join us again from 11 a.m. UTC. We have posted the slides for the sessions on the agenda. The link to the agenda is mojoloop.io/dex. On there, you should have the links to the session, the community forums, in case you want to post a couple of questions or engage with the speakers asynchronously on that platform, and also the links to the slide decks. These sessions are recorded, and we will post up the recordings on the same page in the near future. When that's available, we will let you know. I guess thank you so much. We will see you all tomorrow, 11 a.m. UTC. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thanks, Simeon. Thanks all.